Hi there, welcome to our panel, NFTs. What are they? How do they work? Everything you need to know. Hope that we can do this interesting and emergent topic justice today. To briefly introduce myself, my name is Stephen. I run Warp Records in North America. I'm also proud to be on the A2IM board of directors. Obviously, NFTs is a very huge and buzzy topic, and there's many ways that we can go with this conversation. But I think what we aim to do is offer a primer of the NFT space, and get into some of the implications and opportunities that it might offer musicians and also the companies working in the independent sector. As this space is moving, pretty quickly, I think it's worth noting that we're recording this in May, ahead of the Indie Week, and yeah, I'm really delighted to be joined by a star panel here that I'm going to hand over to introduce themselves in the order of my screen. So, firstly, Pouria.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm the CTO and co-founder at Beatdapp. Beatdapp is a blockchain company that provides real-time audit reports for streaming. I've been personally in the blockchain space for almost over 4 years now, so I've seen it flourish, and I'm excited to see where it'll go.
Thank you. And Dan?
Hi, Daniel, CEO and founder at Paperchain. Just before we begin, I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. So I'd like to acknowledge and pay respects to the traditional custodians of the lands that we're all meeting on or speaking from today, and pay my respect to elders past as well as emerging elders in those communities. Yeah, so at Paperchain, we are a wallet and card funded by your streaming revenue daily. So make it possible for artists and creators to get paid for their streaming revenue every day and give them instant access to the revenue that they're generating. And the way we do that on the back end is leveraging decentralized finance technology. So we've been working in this space for many years, poking at different holes around NFTs and different sort of digital asset technologies, and finally have what we have now. So happy to share or shed light where I can.
Thank you. And finally, Erin.
Hi, I'm Erin Jacobson. I'm known as the music industry lawyer. I am a transactional music lawyer. I protect songwriters, artists, music publishers, independent labels, et cetera, estates, heirs, legacy catalogs, all within the music space. And I'm here today to talk about copyrights and how they relate to NFTs. And I will say, just to get it out of the way up front, because I'm an attorney, I have to give the disclaimer that anything I say is legal advice, doesn't create any attorney-client relationships with any viewers. This is just informational and educational information for you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Erin. So to kick things off, what are NFTs and how do they work? Can I hand to Daniel to talk a little bit about that?
I'll try to keep it, I guess, pretty some way that can be understood by everyone, because it can get pretty deep. So obviously NFTs, non-fungible tokens, which suggests that there's another token, which is a fungible token. And if you think about it that way, fungible tokens are most of what cryptocurrencies that whether it's Bitcoin, Ethereum, or to some extent, or any of those, they could be thought of as fungible tokens, which means that there's numerous of them and they're easily swapped or they're equal value to a numerous other bunch of tokens that exist. Non-fungible tokens are designed to be singular. So they're one-of-ones, there's no equal value. So even though you may have NFTs that potentially represent a similar asset, they should not have the same value attached to them, which makes them like singular and non-fungible and not easily swapped in value between different ones. How do they work? I mean, they're digitally native tokens that have come about on decentralized technologies or blockchain technologies, most prolifically on the Ethereum blockchain. There were attempts by various groups to introduce different assets into the ecosystem, a way to represent different types of assets in the ecosystem. And that was really where my interest came from when I first started reading about Ethereum and this idea of smart contracts. And now you could represent tangible goods as digital assets. That was where it became really interesting to me. And so over the years, that sort of like became part of a lot of the development happening in the communities, was how can we strengthen smart contracts to become tokens, and then non-fungible tokens and represent singular goods and be able to be interoperable with all these different ecosystems that exist on blockchain.
Great. And I'd love to add just one thing to that. So the reason that NFTs are gaining a lot of traction right now is because, you know, the sort of motivation behind them has always been there. Like, we think about something like the Mona Lisa. I can go ahead and make a 1-for-1 copy of the Mona Lisa and it'll be worth a penny maybe. But whereas the regular Mona Lisa, since we know it's authentic, that's worth millions and millions of dollars. So the idea of NFTs, like proving authenticity, that's where most of the traction is coming from today. Obviously, we have a lot to grow from this point, but we'll see what shape the market takes in the future.
And I'll add one thing to that as well. I think something that helps kind of just bring it home is that the NFT market is a collectibles market. So it's, when we're thinking of what are you actually getting when you're purchasing this, it's a collectible that's in this digital form. So I think when we get into the copyright portion of this panel and talk about how it's relating to more physical type products that we already know, that's a helpful way to think of it, is that this is obtaining a collectible asset, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's the kind of scarcity in digital content, essentially. Yeah, that's really great summaries. Thank you, guys. Yeah, so I mean, maybe Pouria, if I hand to you to maybe talk a little bit about the intersection between NFTs and music, and maybe some of the use cases that come to your mind, and potentially services that work in this space.
Yeah, sure. So the first thing that I'll talk about is artists being able to sort of mint collectibles. Like Erin just mentioned, collectibles are a really good use case for NFTs. So let's say they want to pre-fund a project. What they can do is they can put out, 10 copies of an NFT. So this is basically the same thing as a limited run. It proves like scarcity. Like right on the blockchain, we can see that this collectible is scarce. There's only 10 copies. And what the artist can do is sell them, pre-fund their project using the revenue gained from those sales, and then go and produce their album. Obviously, I don't know anything about like what this means legally. Maybe Erin can speak to that a bit more later. But that's one of the main use cases I could see right now with NFTs. Yeah, Dan, is there anything you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is they can be used in so many different ways. Like when we talk about NFTs or what we do, we're not talking about music or media NFTs. We're talking about financial instruments. So on our back end, like we're taking streaming data and essentially creating an NFT, which just really represents the forthcoming payment from a DSP. And that can be used as collateral to then plug into different finance protocols to be able to draw down stable coins. And then you can essentially, it's a programmatic lending facility. But NFTs can also be media NFTs in that they can be used to exploit works or promote works. You can leverage them as like access passes. So one of the really amazing things that's what's being developed here and what's being put in the market is interoperability. And it's, once you sort of understand and how you can interact with like a native wallet, so not just using Coinbase, but using a wallet that can interact with different applications, the idea that you can have an NFT that sits in your wallet, and in your same browser, you can go to all these different websites and different applications. And depending on what token is sitting in your wallet, it can open up access to different features or functionality or different experiences. I think that's where it's kind of like heading. And that's like one of the areas that hasn't been fully built out yet is that post NFT experience. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there. So it's really just like the tip of the iceberg of how we could use it. I personally don't think NFTs as a music release strategy, or at least as a format for releasing music, I don't see the value there yet. It makes, like, to me, it's like visual art makes sense because we value art differently in visual arts, because the media or the format of the media you release art in is part of the artwork. Like to the Mona Lisa example, like it's not just because it's an image of the Mona Lisa, it's also like the depth of the brushwork and the framing and the whole package is considered part of the art. With music, we generally value, you know, the arrangement, the composition, the artistry. Like Chuck Berry's artistry exists whether it's on streaming or whether it's on CD or whether it's in an NFT format. So I'm not sure on the fit with music yet. That's something I haven't figured out, but I think it's largely just how does this play into a larger strategy as an artist? How does this fit into your streaming cycles or your project cycles, whether it's touring or merch or whatever? How can you use that to see different campaigns or use it as promotion? I think that's the most logical point. Whether it becomes a dominant format for like music distribution, I'm not fully sold there yet. I haven't fully thought out how that could actually work or where the value is actually being captured.
Yeah, to build on that, I mean, I think, yes, it can be used potentially for a specific release, but it could also be for access to fan experiences, lifetime concert tickets, one-time concert tickets, pairing some sort of physical merchandise item with an NFT. So the NFT owner gets some sort of piece of physical merchandise. Maybe it's some sort of custom program skins and avatars that are related to your favorite musician, digital trading cards. In the legacy space, there's been some talk about reissuing rare and old photographs of, you know, certain artists, and maybe that's paired with some sort of musical asset. So I think, again, it's so new that, and there really are endless possibilities. It's just a matter of kind of thinking, what can we do with this, and what can we release as an NFT? And there's also tracking capabilities, which is helpful for seeing what fans are actually interested in and buying, and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because one is like the rise of digital communities and what like tokenization can mean for digital communities, whether they're fan bases or, you know, people like on Reddit or Discord or whatever. A lot of those communities are starting to become tokenized. So participation either requires holding a token to do that, or you get paid in rewards depending on like how active you are in those communities. And then NFTs are a part of that as well. So if you're an early subscriber, you're part of like an early group, and because of that you get special privileges. So they're really being used as well to help coordinate and incentivize communities to work together, even monetize at a certain point. And then on the other side of it that I forgot to mention, that Erin just sort of reminded me of, is that, you know, as you know, one of the really interesting things about, you know, leveraging these as a sales mechanism is secondary market sales and interoperability with other markets. So there's the initial sales point where you're selling your whatever your asset it is that you're selling, but then typically in most marketplaces, when it's resold, you'll get a percentage of that as well. So it's the ability for you know, almost like it could be like a fully like locked copyright solution that has like, you know, wallet payments and then faster payments straight to the downstream rights holders on that. And then also, you know, getting paid when your work is copied or used over and over again. Like we're starting to see some of those use cases now. And I think that is something obviously most creators will be interested in utilizing, is how does that become much more of a sustainable long-term earning for them over their career.
I think it could also be a good, a new way of pairing brands with artists, and labels can obviously be involved in that. So, because to issue maybe some sort of unique offering with, you know, an artist pairing with a brand. So again, endless possibilities, I think.
Yeah, I like the fashion piece is really interesting, and then the cross brand promotion. I think Reverseland did like a sneaker drop last year, and the way in the marketplace you bought an NFT, which is basically the NFT was just your right to claim the physical good, and they sold 30 sneakers, I think, and like instead of selling them for $100, what they're able to do is using the price mechanics of like the tokenized ecosystem, using the pricing mechanics. It actually, like based on supply and demand, the supply, like the price of the sneakers actually adjusted based on how much demand was happening in market. So instead of making like a couple of $1,000s on selling the sneakers, they actually end up making over $100,000 because of dynamic pricing that they're able to get through the market activity and the market dynamics of tokenized systems.
Thank you, Zach. Pouria, did you want to say something?
Yeah, no, I'm good. Actually, one other thing I would add is like something that's cool to keep in mind is NFTs run off of blockchain technology, and most of the blockchains that we interact with as consumers are public. So anyone can read that data. It's a public database. You can prove the authenticity, the scarcity, all that good stuff by querying a public database. That's
yeah. No, it's a great point. Yeah, thank you for adding that. And Pouria, back to you. I mean, obviously, you know, blockchain technology and the protocols that the NFTs are based on have been around for a while, but you know, obviously it's become significantly more buzzy in the last, you know, 6 months or so. I'm curious what kind of marketplaces and promotion things you feel have emerged over that time that have helped drive some of that growth?
Yeah, so I'm sure most people are aware of NBA Top Shot by now. If you're not, it's a really good case study to check out for how NFTs can empower existing brands and frankly, like bring in revenue. That's a big thing to look at. I think they run off of the Flow blockchain by Dapper Labs. So there's that. There's also OpenSea as a marketplace. There's Mintable. I think there's another one called Rareable. There's tons of these services that serve as sort of marketplaces for NFTs, and each one of them has like slightly different parameters. Like I think Dan was mentioning that, you know, I could put up an NFT today, sell it for $10, but inside of the NFT, I can say all future sales, I want to get 1% of that revenue into my pocket as well. So depending on what your requirements are, find the right NFT platform for you.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is the way they've like some of them, like Nifty Gateway, like Bitsky, for example, they offer like credit card payments, whereas others you have to pay with ETH or some sort of cryptocurrency. Zora, you can pay with multiple cryptocurrencies. So as a release strategy, you're kind of thinking about, well, which one is going to have the least resistance for my fans? On the other side of it is, you know, obviously if you feel like your fans don't have that sort of like knowledge in the space, and obviously something they can pay with a credit card makes a lot of sense. If not, you can lead them on this other journey. Origin Protocol have been doing releases as well. They did a big one with Blau. I think one of the interesting things just in those two, like what's sort of happening now is like we're starting to see as more like mainstream artists are doing sales. I think you're starting to see like a convergence or just seeing like it's like a temperature check of where we're actually at in terms of like this is mainstream adoption. Like for example, like you have Blau, who's a producer who's been doing work in this space for many years now, and he's well known in the industry as someone who's been trying to innovate music and the release factors of that. So when he did his big release a couple of months ago, I think the total sales over the weekend was like $13 million, and all of that was obviously dependent on the ETH that was getting, the price of ETH and how much was being paid for it, but just a massive amount for an artist to take in that weekend. And then I think over like not long after that, over that same period of time, you had Kings of Leon also did their release. And I think like, you know, one of the largest like mainstream bands on the planet, and not that the sales were terrible, but it definitely wasn't $13 million. So it's kind of like a bit of a, Kings of Leon have a large mainstream fan base with not a lot of knowledge on the NFT side. And maybe I'm trying to figure out why does all this matter? Whereas Blau, not as well known, but has a really intense online following, but then also is really well known in the crypto community. So, you know, it's sort of like, you know, I don't think we're quite there yet in terms of like mainstream adoption, at least fans there. And you've seen it with like even Snoop Dogg and I think as well. And like the sales are good and they're doing good for a short period of time, but I think it's just showing that those mainstream fans are just sort of still a bit hesitant. And then also on the crypto side, even if it's a well-known artist, if they're not really well known or the NFT isn't really well designed, then you're starting to find that the sales cannot be as good as you can see elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, there's a lot of these marketplaces have been, you know, making it a lot simpler for people to mint their own NFTs and for people to buy NFTs, and you know, that convenience angle as you know but it's worth noting just how early we are, how emergent this technology is in terms of mainstream adoption. But I think that's really some really good insights there. Yeah, just to move on, because one of the key areas I think with this from an independent music standpoint these things have moved so fast that there's no real dominant or standard approach for ownership around these songs and royalty rates and copyrights and various things on that side of the coin. So Erin, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of the situations that are emerging here and what the kind of prevailing attitudes are from the various stakeholders around music at the moment.
Sure. So I find it kind of a good thing actually is that because the technology is quite new, or at least, more new in the marketplace, our laws have not caught up with that yet. So the law for the underlying copyrights actually just still functions as we already know it. So one of the questions that is being asked a lot right now is whether buying an NFT gives the buyer an ownership interest in the copyright. And the answer is no, unless that is what the NFT is actually offering. So if you're purchasing, let's say, an exclusive release of a new single, that would yield a unique limited edition copy, which, as we mentioned earlier, could be compared to like a limited run physical album or something like that, certain, a numbered pressed vinyl or whatever. The underlying copyright remains the same in, for example, a song. There is the musical composition, which is usually owned by a music publisher or maybe the songwriter. And then there is the master recording owner, who is usually the record label or, again, maybe an artist if they're self-released. So anyone cannot just, let's say, do a cover song and then release that as part of an NFT, because the same rights that are involved with, licensing cover songs now, or doing something where maybe if there's a video, sync rights are implicated in that sense. So the same mechanical rights, sync rights, etc., need to be licensed from the owners of those copyrights. A lot of the NFTs have artwork. Again, the copyright in that artwork is owned by someone, whether it's a photographer or maybe if it's album artwork, that's usually the record label. So again, these are intellectual property assets that are owned by someone that would need to be licensed, and to just release them as part of an NFT without permission from the rights owners is infringement. So then it becomes kind of, if it's a music NFT, or music is part of the NFT, what is the overall percentage of music that's attributable in that NFT, to figure out, what part of that, how to figure out what those license fees might be, because just like sync licenses, these licenses are going to be negotiated in a free market system. And also what those sounds are, whether it's music or whether it's other sounds, sometimes that's going to go back to what the record contract says and what they're defining as what's being owned under the term of the agreement that an artist has with a label. Because a lot of record contracts talk about that they own, any recordings that have been made by the artist. It doesn't have to be a fully produced, finished master recording of a song. So, again, it kind of goes back, if it's a person that is let's say an artist songwriter, owns their own compositions and masters and everything, and they want to release an NFT, well, they have all the rights to do that. But again, otherwise you're working with the publishers, you're working with the record labels, whoever actually owns those rights. And also, I think one thing to point out too is about the smart contracts, because there's a lot of talk about the smart contracts, and because it has the word contract in it, like, people think that that's a substitute for the kinds of contracts that I do as a lawyer, or like an actual contract document with lots of terms. And that's not what smart contracts are, and what kind of the adage has become is they're not smart and they're not contracts, because they're basically just a trigger that's, you know, making sure that the exchange happened properly in the transaction. So, you know, whatever's supposed to go to A to B went there, and what went to B to A went there, and it's done. So any sort of additional terms, especially if you're dealing with something that has ongoing royalty rights, or if an NFT is actually offering any sort of transfer and copyright ownership, those have to be still in a regular legal contract as we do today. Or if it's a situation where there are multiple rights owners involved in releasing an NFT, that has to all be done by licensing and contracts ahead of time. All the parties need to be on board before that NFT can be released. And the other thing that is, you know, still very consistent with how our industry works today is that if there are any sort of rights transferred in the underlying rights, or any royalty rights that are transferred, there is still the need for administration of those rights. So it's not at a point where something can just be released to the public that, you know, oh, buy part of the copyright for this, because the rights need to be administered just as all of us rights owners administer the rights that we have now in the technologies that we are more familiar with. So that's kind of the short rundown.
It's an impossible question to answer.
I think one of the, even from a consumer side, like what, to your point, Erin, about what you're actually buying is not always consistent. And oftentimes you're buying this NFT, but that doesn't even infer that you have rights to the underlying asset or image. It just points to a JPEG image that sits on an AWS somewhere, and that could disappear at any point, and now you're just left with an NFT that points to a dead URL. So, and to Pouria's point about NBA Top Shots, like I think that's probably one of the worst in terms of like ownership, because in the contracts, like they keep centralized all of the underlying video assets and media assets and everything related to it at any point that they can withdraw that. So it's kind of like, as a consumer, it's like obviously making people aware of what they're actually buying and owning. And I think that's where you start to see the valuations differ, right? It's like what you actually get. It's interesting though, I think talking to a lot of like artists and managers and labels who are trying to think about this is, I think the dream is that this idea that a contract is obviously just logic really that defines how a particular asset can be monetized, is I hear pretty commonly that I don't want the PROs to administer for me anymore. I don't want the mechanicals to administer for me anymore. I want to have a contract that is machine readable and can be, you know, interoperable with all these different like streaming platforms or any sort of where there's sort of like royalties being collected. And that's how I want it to do. Obviously, that's not taking into account the massive amount of work of trying to get everyone onto a system like that or trying to standardize all that. But that's typically what I'm hearing is that they're looking for ways to take back ownership of that. So it's like I can control the assets that I have, and everyone who wants to do business with me comes through this same contract that comes through me, not through these different parties. So it's kind of been an interesting, like, I guess philosophically and then politically, some of the motivations for trying to solve that, which I think is really interesting. And that's what they see about it. It's like, this is our chance, or my chance, to not have to go through these really, you know, what people say are really inefficient bodies in terms of administering my publishing or my mechanicals. Well,
I mean, because I have to deal with those types of issues a lot for, you know, dealing with PROs and et cetera, I mean, they have a massive job, and despite the complaints, they do a great job at what they do. And I think, you know, at some point, maybe the technology will be there to just do it all yourself in that manner. But because we have so many different sources of income with so many different royalty streams, and where, you know, you would need a full staff to just manage making sure that everything is coming in properly, even if it's done on blockchain and done in a more automated way. But you know, I also deal a lot with independent artists, and I don't think that at this point it's really feasible for that kind of structure, because there's so much misunderstanding about what the different royalty streams are and who is collecting them, and so maybe for a sophisticated company that might be doable, but for an independent artist doing it on their own, I think it would be so much effort to have to just completely manage all of it, that it would really take a lot of time away from their time to be creative and create their music.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Erin. Yeah, there's a really amazing summary of so many of the emergent trends there. Thank you for that. Thank you, Daniel. Yeah, so I mean, another key issue that I know people are very conscious and interested in when it pertains to blockchain in general and the implications to NFTs is the environmental impact and of this kind of technology. Pouria, I was wondering if I could ask you, what you think the key issues surrounding sustainability of the space might be?
Yeah, so if we're talking about environmental sustainability, really it just comes down to the consensus algorithm that the underlying blockchain uses. So what that means is Bitcoin uses this consensus algorithm called proof of work. Proof of work by nature is really, really inefficient. By design, actually. It has to be that way in order for the network to be secured. There's like a million videos out there on why that's the case, but let's just leave it at that for now. So Ethereum, which a lot of these NFT platforms sort of run on top of, that's currently proof of work, but they're currently they're currently moving to phase 2 of Ethereum, which is turning it into proof of stake, which is a completely different consensus algorithm. Proof of stake uses way less than proof of work. In terms of electricity, it uses way less, it's way faster. It's just better on almost all accounts, except maybe security. That's still up for debate. So when people are complaining about sustainability, make sure they know what they're talking about. Make sure they're talking about it in relation to proof of work and not anything like proof of stake or proof of authority, because those two, proof of stake and proof of authority, are actually pretty darn efficient.
Yeah, I think towards the end of this year, they're supposed to be pushing proof of stake onto mainnet. Right now, they're starting to set up nodes on the test net, so people are starting to run nodes, and so it will be based on accumulation of ETH rather than actual computing power. But I think they estimate that once it's alive on the mainnet, they'll be able to process either the same, I think they'll be able to process the same amount of transactions as the Visa network at like 1/10 of the electricity usage. So it'll actually be energy-wise more efficient than Visa's network. But again, that's what they claim, and it remains to be seen on whether that'll actually actualize. And also the fact is that a lot of upgrades to the network have, when they've said it's going to take 6 months, it takes years and years. But this is something they have been working on for years. I think the complaints are valid. I think when they started, it was designed, especially Bitcoin, it was designed to be inefficient, but that was designed specifically to secure the network. But I do think complaints about how inefficient they've grown and exploded, and the usage of power that's required to run them, I think that's all valid. It just comes down to how urgent you think it is that it is addressed. Are there other industries that are more impactful, or that add less value but are more impactful in the environment? I mean, there's a number of different ways you could look at it.
Yeah, I think it's an important thing to pay attention to, because sustainability and is just really important for the ongoing health and longevity of our planet. But I think that also, as both of you were saying, you know, the technology is moving along. And if we think back to when computers first started, I mean, there were computers that took up entire rooms, and those probably were not sustainable either. And now we have little tiny computers that go in our pockets every day. So, you know, over time, I'm sure they'll be able to work out a lot of that and make it something that's more sustainable, or at least that would be the hope.
Yeah, and I think, and like in the case recently with like Iran, it's like, okay, if they're having like power shortages across the country, then, and that's impacting the daily lives of their consumers, then yeah, shut that shit down. It's like, it's you know, those things obviously, when you put in perspective, are much more important than being able to maintain nodes and things like that.
Yeah, thank you for that, everyone. Yeah, so I mean, it's a huge topic. We could keep talking, and I want to hear more from you guys, but our time's coming to an end. But I just wanted to end up just going, offer it to you one-on-one. Just talk a little bit about, you know, if there's anything you might want to leave people with, or what the future looks like for tokens in music. Who wants to start? Erin?
Sure. So, I mean, going off what I just said, I think that it will get more sophisticated. We've already talked about how there's really endless possibilities with how this technology can be used. And so as time goes on, a lot of those will be realized, and think of more new ways to use the technology. I know there's also a lot of talk within the music community about using not necessarily NFTs, but more so the blockchain technology for song splits and payments going into the wallets and things like that, which would really change how splits are done to make sure that they're done in the room and that they're not easily changed after that. But yeah, I just think it remains to be seen, and there's potentially a lot of exciting things to watch because there's a lot of possibility.
Thank you. Dan?
Yeah, I think it doesn't stop. I think it's opened up a lot of creators, not only just in music, but at any sort of creative level, the opportunities that can be found within independence. That's not going to work for everyone. And does it work at scale? I don't know, but having the tools there is just like really, it's sort of like opened people up a lot to how that can work. I think you'll get more people buying into the political motivations behind it more than anything, because the idea that you can, you know, redistribute wealth in such ways by putting more power down at the base layer, I think is just like a really powerful narrative. And I think so they've captured that. I think that's going to go away. I think right now people will start getting better at the post NFT sale and the experience there. And what can be done in terms of like fan engagement and fan monetization. I think one of the really interesting or powerful things about tokenization is the ability to reward and incentivize communities and audiences and fans, and not just the artists themselves as well. So you can start to have little micro economies starting to build. And you're already, like, you've seen that in the past with like niche blogging and things like that. Now you're going to see the monetization of those communities, and then, you know, tokens and NFTs will very much be a part of that.
Thank you. Pouria?
Yeah, so the only things that I would add are that today, NFTs, smart contracts, blockchain, I think they're at best assistive to like what we have going on in our processes right now. Later on, of course, hopefully they'll become more automated. I think that there is still a huge barrier to getting it like consumer ready. I think Dapper Labs is one of the companies that I follow closely personally, just in terms of like getting consumer adoption going, because right now, as it stands, I'm too scared to hold my own private keys. Like it's really sketchy, to be honest. And that's coming from someone who's very tech focused. So I think watch this space, do your research right now. Keep in mind that everything moving forward is just going to keep getting better and better. And yeah, keep your eyes peeled for new developments from like all these cool companies that are coming out.
Thanks so much. Pouria, Daniel, Erin, really appreciate your time. That was fascinating. And thanks to A2IM for having us. I will post some more resources for you that want to learn a bit more in the chat, in the live chat. But for now, thanks and goodbye.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thanks, Pouria. Thanks, Erin.